to take care of at 5, so he's a little bit delayed. But in the interest of time, we'll get started. We have a very distinguished panel with us tonight, whose names I will probably bobble. Yes. Supervisor McPherson, Craig Wilson, Chief Deputy for the Sheriff's Department, Rich Sampson, Division Chief from CAL FIRE, and KevinMcClish,
yes,
who I have met before, so please forgive me, who is the Boulder Creek Fire Chief. So I hope everybody we're going to devote half of this to questions that we have instigated and remarks that the panelists wanted to make, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions, but we've got enough people here that we thought it would be best to have people submit their questions in writing on those cards, which were out by the front door. I think some of my colleagues have got more cards if you need them, and so they will help me out by starting through the cards when we get to question and answer. So, yes, Jen Michelson there is one of my colleagues. Chris Berry also helped organize this. So without further ado, we'll get started. Did you want to say a few words to begin with before you have to rush out the door?
Sure. Yeah, if that's okay.
Please do.
Everybody hear me all right? Yes. Okay. Thank you for coming. Obviously, this is a very important topic to a lot of people. I'm Supervisor Bruce McPherson that represents you here in the 5th District. And I just want to say thank you for being here. This is a tremendous facility that some of you probably worked on too, but now this is the Boulder Creek Recreation and Park District building. So it's ours now, so that's cool. There's still work to do, but we'll talk about that some other time. But thank you, and support this as much as you can. Holly Green is doing everything she can to lead the charge to make this the best recreation facility in the county. I am going to just talk about a few things county related, not Bear Fire itself, and the experts will say it, and what a phenomenal job we had with the respondents, the professional firefighters, the volunteer firefighters, and a lot of luck with no wind too. But be that as it may, we held this down to, or they held that down to a really manageable degree. Was it 390 acres, something like that? But a couple things that I want to talk about that the county is looking into and doing something now. We have beefed up our code compliance effort. Now this fire was started, as you know, it wasn't a cannabis farm or somebody, having a match that just got out, it was dropped in the side of the road. It was a deliberate thing, and you know the story. But there is a lot of concern that we have with code compliance in the wiring facilities and so forth, the butane tanks that are being used here and there. And we were on that. We were doing a whole oversight of just in the mountains areas in particular, San Lorenzo Valley, up in the Bonnie Doon area, Corralitos in particular, those 3 areas mainly. And so that's one thing that the county is looking at to see how we can prevent these things from happening so people are up to code with their wiring facilities, electrical, gas, whatever the case may be. Secondly, I'm been trying to find out how we can do more to support county fire. County Fire takes the position, in essence, of CAL FIRE after the fire season. They're there 5 or 6 months, and then County Fire, and it's a great cooperative arrangement. We use their facilities. There's 4 CAL FIRE stations in the county, plus Pajaro, which is a kind of a separate entity. But County Fire is supported by us through County Service Area 48, and we are running out of funds to support that system. So I am looking at how do we try to get something on the ballot, and you're going to hate this. It's going to be, it's going to be probably some kind of a parcel tax for that for the parcels within the County Service Area 48. My guess is it would be in the neighborhood of $20 a month or something of that nature. but don't hold me to that. I don't know. We're just looking into it. If we don't get it, we're going to run out of funds with county fire, and we need that initial contact and observation. And they don't just look at they don't just respond to fires. They do a lot of medical responses too, head-on collisions and so forth that happen as well. That is something just in the initial stages. If it comes up, it may well be on the November ballot, but don't hold me to it, and I'm not sure what it's going to say exactly, but it's something that I'm interested in, because if we don't do it, we're not going to have that coverage for half of the year in the rural areas of Santa Cruz County. We keep trying to make this a situation where we can prevent things and not have to respond to them, so to speak, and that's what everyone would say, I know. But as far as the county goes, those are two main things that we are doing at this point to see what we can do to hopefully prevent more any kind of fire from happening or from getting big. And to prevent it, the code compliance effort, to respond to it with the service area 48, and we may address it. I just want to let you know you may be hearing about it, and when you do, please let me know. Keep your cards and letters coming, you always do, but I would appreciate it to let me know exactly how you feel. But that's basically what the county is looking at. It doesn't have anything to do particularly with, there's Matt, there we go. Yes, there we go. With CAL FIRE, but we just want to make sure we're covered in essence throughout the year. I really appreciate the input that you have, and your turnout today is very, very noticeable, and that shows me how important this is. We know that we're in a serious situation if one gets away from us, and God help us that we ever have something like happening in Southern California. Good luck through this weekend. I would like to answer questions, but from here I'm going to the Santa Margarita Water Basin. I'm not going to say a lot about it, but it's a new state-imposed law that for people who are connected to water connections or whose homes and businesses are connected to water connections that are not in the city or a water district, they're in wells. Well, there's a lot of straws that go into wells that deplete the water table. And so we're trying to manage the system as best we can, and the Santa Margarita Basin takes all of San Lorenzo Valley, literally, and Scotts Valley is part of Santa Cruz, Mount Herman. And so we're getting together and managing a plan of how to best manage that. The well owners are a part of that organization. I don't want to talk too much about it, but it does have something to do with fire and what we're going to do if something should happen, that we'd have enough water to put it out and not have our aquifer be depleted to the degree that it is in mid-county in particular. So with those two things, and plus the water, that's what I wanted to mention. Thank you for being here. I will hear any questions you have, and please send them along to my office if you want to ask me. But I appreciate your being here and for everything you're doing for the San Lorenzo Valley. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I don't believe anybody else has prepared remarks. So we came up with some questions, and the first one that I would throw out to you is, what were the factors in the natural environment that made this fire grow to the size that it did? Don't speak twice.
Okay, so this fire was 390 acres. If you look at the fire history in Santa Cruz Mountains, see for the last 10 years, 98% of the fires are kept to less than a quarter of an acre. So this is an odd one for us to hit. We're prepared for it, but when this happens, our normal response goes out the window, and we have to really ramp up very quickly. Some of the reasons that it got big was kind of the way it was started, and the fact that it was dark when it started. Once it's dark, we lose air pressure. It's on a very narrow and very steep canyon. That canyon has, where it started was in redwood and tan oak, but it rapidly changed to brush and drier vegetation. We had a very wet winter last year, following about a 6-year drought. So 2 things come from that. One, the big fuels, the heavy fuels, are still in the drought condition. It's going to take several years for the moisture to get into those what we call 1,000-hour fuels, the big logs and the large fuel, to go ahead and recover and get back to where they're moisture and they won't carry fire. The brush has also been hit by that drought where, I mean, the drought got so bad where it was killing manzanita and killing coyote bushes toward the end. So we have a lot of dead fuel up on that steep hillside. Some of it's 100% slope. Then, with all the rain, that automatically throws a lot of water in and a lot of nutrients in, starts flushing out a lot of fine fuels like grass and some of the finer new vegetation on the brush. Fine fuels make fire go quicker and make the ignition go quicker and spread. It's carried by the heavier fuels. So here we are on steep ground with heavier fuels that are cured, and a lot of fine fuels, a lot of leaves and everything else that came up from that wet winter, and that carried it fairly quickly. And plus the fire itself, when it started, was spread out over a large area. So it got big really quickly because of that. Now normally, when we have big fires down here, they're north wind events. And the last map that you have down there shows a lot of the fires for about the last 40, 50 years, a lot of the larger fires. And if you see them, a lot of them are kind of linear fires. They're oriented mostly north to south, some of them northwest to southeast, some of them northeast to southwest. That's the direction of the wind. So for instance, if you look at the Summit fire, when that one ran, the north winds blew it from the northwest to the southeast and right on down the ridge. In this case, we didn't have that, so it stayed fairly small at 390 acres for one of our large fires instead of 4,000 or 15,000 acres, and that's what contributed to it.
Thank you. So the second, can you all hear me without the mic? Excellent. The second question is, what were the conditions in the human environment that made this fire large and grow as quickly as it did?
Arson definitely played into it.
Yeah.
Human condition, start a fire, it's going to go fast. I don't know if you had trouble in terms of access because of the roads, but that definitely, roads in that canyon.
I'll just jump in
Yeah, please
on
do.
that particular issue. We did have trouble with access, especially initially, due to the darkness, streets being unnamed. It was kind of a guessing game to find out where the origin was initially, because I was the first one in there. So, given that, even though we got there fairly quick, the size of the fire and the amount that it had grown probably didn't make a lot of difference, but it did make some difference. So.
Third question, was the evacuation successful, and what could we do to make it better the next time?
So the way the evacuation works is when we have a fire, we immediately get on scene and start doing suppression. When it starts growing, other agencies come in. One of the main agencies that comes in with us is the Sheriff's Department. When we get to the point where we realize this fire is going big and it's going toward an area that's threatened, then we start going into unified command with the Sheriff's Department, and they were right there that night. We say, we need to evacuate this area. And it's broken up into different sections of the community. And with that, I want to turn it over to you, how they handle from there.
Sure. Well, so when a fire first starts, there's a lot of confusion. So we only have our deputy staff that's normally on, and so that was approximately 8 deputies. That's what we have in the entire county at any given time, and then we get more if we need them, which takes some time. But in any case, the shift supervisor and shift were faced with a fire that was growing rapidly in the conditions that Chief McClish just described. And so what they do is they start looking at where the fire is right in front of them going, and they start going to the nearest houses, and knocking on doors and telling people to leave. And they also asked for reverse 911 and some other communication devices to send out signals so that people might get it then. But there's a lot of estimation in that. So speaking with the supervisor that was on that night, he said that when he put out the reverse 911, he overshot the area, right? So he's not having the luxury that we have here where there's lights and maps and we already know what everything happening. He's going to the area quickly, doesn't know a lot, knows that there's an emergency, and he sort of says, like, put out a reverse 911 in an area, and he bounds it by roads. And so he says he overshot it. So a lot of people got that notice that probably didn't need to evacuate, but we didn't know that at the time. He told me that they ended up evacuating about 75 to 100 people that night. And we're not really in close communication with CAL FIRE or Boulder Creek Fire at that point, other than we know that we're on scene. Everyone's sort of scrambling to save lives on the early end and try to get a handle on it. And then it's later that Chief Sampson just mentioned when we got an idea of what's actually happening that we start working together a little closer. And then we start taking our direction from CAL FIRE because they have a lot of intelligence, both on mapping and what the fire is likely to do. And so we make projections on where it might go, and they sort of direct us to concentrate on certain areas to evacuate, and then it takes some of the estimation off of our hands because that's really not what we're best at in particular. So the first few hours of the fire, or any emergency really, are very confusing for all persons involved. No matter how much training or maps or things we have, those things help, but they never, there's never an emergency where everyone that just gets involved knows exactly what's happening and what's going to happen next. And those are those hours where, heroes are made, both the people that live there, because people mostly take care of themselves, and then we come in when sometimes people don't know or can't take care of themselves, or sometimes there's people who are confined to their house, and that's when we really depend on neighbors to tell us that, even if the neighbors can't get there. And we end up jumping fences and sort of kicking down doors sometimes if we think they're in danger. And then we do find people, that are they were unable to evacuate on their own, and we concentrate on that. There's also a really large animal component now, as you know. It used to be just horses, but now it's all kinds of animals, and those present a number of unique challenges. No one's ready to have the equipment necessarily to evacuate those animals at that moment. Those come in a few hours because we have some great volunteer resources, the equestrians and others. But all that takes time to put in place, and that's what we don't have, right, in those first few hours where things can go wrong. And luckily in this fire, as you know, we didn't have a loss of life.
Excellent. We've all read about the fires in Southern California and then the mudslides in Montecito. So one of the questions we'd like to ask is, what's been done to weatherize the burn site and mitigate the danger from mudslides? We've been lucky not to have a lot of rain this winter, but it's a sick question.
So what happens after the fires in Southern California and some of the ones up in the North State this fall, the burn intensities were so bad that pretty much everything was gone on some certain hillsides. There are a few small sections of this fire that approach that, but by and large, after the initial rush to the top of the ridge, it ended up being a backing fire, and so we didn't see the intensities. Fairly soon after the fire we get a handle on the fire, certain people are going out to assess, see if we're going to have that same type of a problem. And it was determined fairly quickly that we did. What we do is look at a lot of the drainage facilities, though, and specifically the ones that during suppression activities that we might have damaged. We're putting D6 bulldozers down some of these dirt roads or over the sides of hills, hitting water lines, hitting culverts, or filling in stuff just to get through. Keep in mind when most of that work is happening, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, there's smoke and it's dark and you're on this hillside. So they're just trying to get a line around the fire. So after that, we'll go back as part of this assessment, determine whether we're going to have some of these heavy burn area issues, and then also see what we broke. Because if we broke it and we can fix it, we'll come back in. So we worked with the community afterward. There's probably about 4 or 5 large culverts that got damaged in the fire. We pulled those out, put new culverts in, and got the road open again, just to make sure we're gonna get the water flow so we don't start creating issues like that. Water lines that we break, we'll try to fix those so we're not creating erosion there. Other than that, there's not much more that you can do, because probably 30 years ago, they used to fly a lot of fires and just put grass seed, just turn it into a lawn. After a lot of grass getting thrown on the hillsides, they did some studies and found out that didn't really, in fact, if anything, it made it worse. And Mother Nature seems to do a real good job on her own for most situations recovering it. A lot of leaf fall from the leaves that are left on the hills if they're not on the trees. That does a lot of ground cover. So we don't do a lot of winterizing other than for what's broken and focusing on erosion control features. A lot of those we hit, and then the rest of it really falls on the individual landowner, because in this case it was all private property.
So, and our next question is rather long and multi-part, but we'd like to know what are the overall environmental impacts of the fire, and how do we address future activities in the fire footprint to not exacerbate the problems that were pre-existing, like erosion, runoff, stand replacement, land use changes. Address some of that. Matt, you're nodding your head.
Well, my immediate thought goes to, and I've seen several different burn spots where there's plastics and metals, and there are a lot of properties around that have a collection of old cars and old materials, and that is just, it's toxic, and it melts, it gets into the air, it gets into the water. So what we can do is clean up our properties. Remove extra debris. I went through the damage inspection report, and almost every single property had very poor vegetation management, safe space. So keeping the vegetation away from your house, doing the 30 feet of leaning green and 100 feet of defensible space would go a long way to slowing down fires and saving property and protecting the environment. There's a few things.
Thank you.
And there was one break like on Graham Hill Road.
The shaded fuel breaks. The fire safe councils have been doing these all around the county, and they are fantastic. They can really slow down a fire, and we're getting more and more of them. That's one of the things that the Fire Safe Santa Cruz is really getting in position to do them in areas that are outside of the established fire safe areas and councils.
So that feeds into our final question before we go to questions from the audience, is what can we do to make our communities more resilient to future fires like this one? Ed?
I would say in this case, adding on to what Matt was talking about as far as defensible space, if we could not only around the homes you have defensible space is also your driveway and your street. In this case, once you get off the asphalt of Bear Creek Road, it's all private. And so it's not public works can't go in there and clean the vegetation back. And I remember working with the road associations, or talking to the road associations on some of the visits I had in there before, and they were doing everything they could to knock back the scotch, or with the different broom along the road. But it was trying to catch up, and they couldn't quite get ahead of it after some of the weather conditions we've had over the last decade. If that road system could be maintained in more of a shaded fuel break, or just maintaining the road surface plus 10 feet, a lot of these could be contained a lot easier. And it would also help on access for us getting in and you guys getting out, making it a lot safer. And so one of the big things is you have this road system. If this fire's going big, odds are we're going to be in there in the dark, and you're going to be trying to get out in the dark. If you already have a road system that's already half covered with brush, imagine what that looks like at 2 o'clock in the morning when we have this 13-foot tall fire engine, 16,000 pounds coming in, and you're trying to get out, and then you light it on fire. And that's what the kind of the pictures you saw up north. We didn't quite have that this time because you have a lot fewer residences in here. But if we did have wind, we would have been fighting this fire probably all the way down to Ben Lomond. And that would have been the issue canyon after canyon. So these private roads have to be maintained. It's just starting on the dimensional space is not enough. Cleaning up these sites where we have a lot of vehicles and a lot of other debris. One of the reasons that that fire got hot fairly quickly, the amount of inorganic material on that slope that was very, very flammable. I think I remember one barrel that had Jet A stamped on the side. That stuff does not need to be out there when we're fighting fire. And you would have to get past it. So we really need to clean up. And I think that's said enough.
Is that
Well, I-
gonna take what?
I actually don't think you said enough. I'd really like to reiterate what you're saying. Access is huge. There's many private roads and streets in Boulder Creek itself where the brush is just tight on the road, it's tight overhead, and without maintaining that, it makes it very difficult. When we were up there that night, the first night, trying to drive around, there were some areas we really couldn't get through on just because everything was so thick and the flame lengths were going across the road. We're not going to drive through that because we don't know what's on the other side. And if they had been, proper clearance and maintained, it would have kept the flame lengths from being on the road. We could have gotten through, or other people could have got out. So, really, really important. And something a little bit unrelated, but totally related, is addressing the street signs. If you guys don't have your addresses posted, how are we going to find you? It's hard to find you. You don't have street signs up. It makes it really, really tough on us when we're out there trying to do our job. So just want to reiterate that.
And I have some comments on social resiliency, so the supervisor might lead something on this too. And I'm preaching the choir here, I know, you guys aren't watching television right now, you're at a community meeting, like old style America. But, knowing something about your neighbors, you may not be the best of friends, or you might be blessed with that situation. And sometimes you get mad at your neighbor, and then a year later it doesn't seem as bad as it was, hopefully it didn't get worse. But knowing something about your neighbors and maybe having more conversations with them so that if an event occurs, whether it's a flood, an earthquake, or a fire, or something else that we're not anticipating, and someone comes to you and says like, hey, who's in that house? Hey, there's a couple that lives in there. Or they're on vacation. You don't have to know where they are, but just you have to know what you're doing, not because you're the best of friends necessarily, but because you're neighbors. And so you have a common interest in taking care of each other. And these gentlemen are speaking about, of course, the important environmental resiliency factors. But that's how you that's how you live through an emergency, and that's how you rebound from an emergency. So I'll bet you, some of you here, your neighbors didn't come for one reason or another. You can have a conversation like, hey, I went to this meeting, I learned, we ought to think about our space, and, you got to do it kind of soft because they're going to get mad at you, if you say it like you're Mr. or Mrs. Bossy Pants, but there's a way to connect that's not threatening, and the more you know about your immediate neighbors in any case, the more you can take care of the neighborhood, the more likely we are all, to be successful. I see the director of our emergency operations center here, Rosemary. We run the CERT teams that the fire uses are volunteers that get specialized training in medical and evacuation. Those people are doing that function that I'm describing right now. They're doing it sort of an official way, but we don't have to be involved at that level to be good neighbors and to make safer neighborhoods. You can organize about almost any sort of common principle that you all share, and your properties are an obvious one.
I think there was a question during the discussion too, who's responsible for those roads, those private roads? Well, the property owner. I know you don't want the county coming into your roads unannounced, or the state or anybody else. So it's up to the private property owner. The main thoroughfares, of course, the Highway 9 is a state highway, and then we have the county roads in general. But when it goes off the main track, it's your responsibility to keep that fire safe, so to speak.
And keeping the debris out of the yards, and keeping the number of inoperable cars severely limited, and that's all property owner's responsibility. And the county has the authority to come in and probably red tag and abate almost every house out there. And we're not going to do that because that that makes no sense. It's really your responsibility to maintain your own place. We don't want to have to go in and do that. So,
One other part of preparing is educating, well, I guess educating the government, but basically, one of our challenges was we had very little idea of what was in there. Because the number of homes that are really on the rolls are not very many. There's a couple of them now in Canyon. One of the biggest surprises we had after we were starting to wind down, we had pretty well got a handle on the fire, was we found there was a camp in there where it was a regular retreat where you may have 50, 80 people in there. We had no idea that was in there. The county had no idea that was in there. I mean, they have just buildings and they bring people in there for organized events. Fortunately, it was empty. There was the caretaker, a couple caretakers in there, but if it had happened a weekend before when they might have had an event in there, and this is after dark and they might have all been bedded down, instead of having maybe about 40 or 50 people trying to evacuate, and they all knew the area and knew how to get out, we might have had to add another 50 to 80 people on top of that, and they didn't know the area, didn't know the way out, and that would have been a problem. So hiding things and having big gates to keep people out of, they may have a purpose, but it's counterproductive to us. Because the North County fires, or the North State fires, started a week before. And so 2 of our strike teams were already up there, and a lot of our local government was up there. So the people that came into the fire were the few people that were left, plus people from Southern California that don't work this county. So 2 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, you have an engine, and they're going down these roads that don't have addresses, they've got gates on them, and somebody's saying, hey, you gotta get up there, my house is at the end of it. And you're looking down, I don't even know if I want to take a Jeep down that road, and you want to take that engine down there. And I don't even know for sure if there's a house at the end. We need to know that that's out there, and if it's out there, that's why we have the ordinances saying that you need a certain size road, certain grade, certain surface, and when you get to the structures have certain requirements for construction, what amount of water, turnaround, so when we do get down that quarter-mile driveway, we can actually turn that big engine on and get out if we have to run. And that's what needs to be corrected for making it more resilient.
Well, very good. That's the end of the questions that we organizers have prepared. Oh, and I'm getting a handful of questions from the floor here. So, oh my. First person took advantage of the real estate here and asked 3 questions. Let me read them so that I can see if I can condense them in some way. Okay, well, I'm going to ask these separately. So, how much has this area changed in terms of fire danger in the last 20 years?
I'd say the biggest change has just been the fuel because of the drought. Other than that, it's been pretty much in that same condition for, I'd say, for about 20 years.
It's thick out there. If people aren't managing their properties and controlling the the growth, and it gets out of hand. It really does. I mean, you look, if you drive down the road, you can look at certain properties, and you can tell the people that are providing defensible space for their homes. You look at that piece of property and go, wow, wish we had a fire there because I could do something with that. Versus the other side of the road, it's just nothing but thick ladder fuels, and it's like, what am I going to do with that? So, but as far as in the last 20 years, I don't know that.
How do you control that? How do you get these property owners that have properties that are jeopardizing all the people that have well-kept properties, which I've talked to you about before? And what do we do about it? I mean, everything being said is great in theory, but what do we do in practice here to fix the problem?
Fire safe councils do have the chipper program, so organizing a weekend and actually getting out, going door to door, getting people involved, getting them to commit to spending the time. You can make a lot of work with a little work with a lot of hands, and have a chipper for the weekend and remove a whole lot of vegetation. And it may be that you're just getting someone's permission to do their frontage if they're not going to be around, or but if you can, it's a good way to get the community working together.
Yeah, it's great in theory.
It's great in theory, I know.
You know, what I talk about is when I go cargo, is put my neighbors in the paper. You know, I think you can just have people that will deal and they think the way it is what's natural and meant to be and okay.
Let's try and restrict the speeches to the speakers. I feel your pain, and I'm not even Donald Trump, but I've got quite a few, I've got quite a few questions here. So I'm plowing ahead. What are the most common sources of wildfire in the Boulder Creek area?
Common sources?
I think they must be nation sources.
Well, the easiest thing is, it's gonna be human caused. 98% of the fires are gonna be human caused. And then from there, outside of the fire districts, we keep our data. And what we're seeing, the biggest is a broad classification called debris fires. That could be from somebody having a pile burn versus somebody dumping their ashes versus somebody dumping, just burning a barbecue and getting out of control. So some type of a ground fire where they're not taking care of it. That's the biggest number of fires.
Okay, well, here comes a question that I think we've all been anticipating. How many cannabis-related fires have there been since the 2008 Castle Rock fire?
Unfortunately, we do not keep that kind of data. We have, is it a debris fire? Is it a house fire? Is it a vehicle fire? There's about a dozen different fire types that we take, that we've been keeping records on for probably the last 50, 60 years. And there's some new types that we would like to take, but the databases aren't set up for that. So we haven't yet to be able to capture that.
I can tell you though, for this immediate area, the majority of cannabis-related fires are all indoor grows. Start their houses on fire due to improper electrical installations, things of that nature. And there's a handful of those a year. Wildland fires in the immediate area here, you don't really see much of that, or we haven't seen much of that that's been cannabis-related.
Well, I noticed there are quite a few cannabis-related questions. Do you want to address those all at once, or shall we jump around? There are a lot of questions and other issues I put to you, Dan.
We can stay on cannabis.
Okay. Careful what you wish for. All right. Well, this, leaving aside the lengthy introduction here, can you speak to the fire hazard introduced by cultivation in redwood forests and timber production zones?
I think the way I see it, because I'm a forester, working for a fire department. And it used to be, we would get fires through these areas routinely. I mean, 100 years ago or previous. I mean, it naturally occurs. And then when you started getting into the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, we were still getting some fires. And they weren't so bad because we didn't have that much infrastructure out in the forest. So you could go ahead and have a 2,000-acre fire, and it's no big deal. You just catch it in the next canyon. We can't do that now because we have all this infrastructure out in here. Now they're essentially where these vacant wilderness or these timberlands are now rural subdivisions. And over the last several years, we have a new a new player added into this. And so there's even more infrastructure being added into this environment. And with this canyon, with the road system the way it is, and the rest of the normal infrastructure we have to deal with, that's just exacerbated it a lot more. Especially when you have to throw in people, they want their security, they want their privacy, they don't want anybody to see what they're doing in there. That just makes it harder for us to fight fire. So where before, we could let it burn through, catch it, was a lot easier. Now we actually have to go in there and start protecting infrastructure. So the pictures that we have during the suppression, it was interesting. 10 years ago, I don't remember seeing too many pictures where we have several engines lined up protecting a plastic greenhouse or a grove of green, dark green plants. And now we do, because that's what's out there. And before, we would have just let it burn through and caught it on the other side.
So do you all think that illegal cannabis sites have increased our fire risk?
I think they've certainly increased the fire risk, and I've gone on inspections of various legal and illegal sites, and the use of generators, the use of electrical cords that spiderweb across the site are just a fire waiting to happen. I've seen electrical cords going through ponds. There's not a lot of clear thinking at times out there. So they definitely have exacerbated the risk. As Rich was saying, I don't know how many fires have actually started because of them, but the risk is definitely higher.
Go back to what I was first saying, 95+% of the fires are human caused. You throw more people out into the woods like that, and most cannabis operations that I've been going into don't just have one person out there working it. You're usually bringing in several people to work it, maintain it, and then wrap it up at the end. And that just compounds the amount of emission sources that are out there, because in a lot of cases, they're living out there. Or they're camping out there.
So the last question as I read these about that is someone who's, oh, wait, there's more, we'll deal with those later. Relating to the lady in the back of the room, who I don't see at the moment anymore, it says there's a 40-acre parcel in litigation, whatever that means, is being used as a pot grow and spot for homeless who started a fire just before the Bear Fire. What can we as a neighborhood do?
Become the sheriff's department.
Sorry?
Become the sheriff's department.
Become the sheriff's department. We do have, right now, the regulations, as most of you know, on cannabis are kind of up in the air in terms of, there is, the current code allows for limited immunity. The new code will have set distinction as to what is not legal. That said, if there's an illegal cannabis grow, you can report it to the licensing office. They can go out and inspect it. They can abate it. They get a lot of complaints, and they are investigating them. They're also working with the state agencies to do enforcement around the county. And just a week and a half ago, Rich and I were out on the North Coast doing inspections of properties. That is happening. You can also do code enforcement if there are people who are living in trailers or living off the grid with no septic, and county code enforcement can come out there as well. So those are options. There is, again, right now in the cannabis section, they have one code enforcement officer, they're hiring another, and they're trying to get more staff. So they're ramping up, and there's going to be there are a lot of complaints. Same goes for our code enforcement department. We're almost at full staff. We've just done a prioritization of properties, and we're getting about 1,000 complaints in a year to deal with. So we're trying to keep up and trying to get there. So immediate response may not happen, but within a week or two, definitely some kind of response, particularly if it's a very dangerous situation. So those are options. And if it's obvious illegal activity, then yeah, the sheriffs can be called out there. It has to be something they can act on them. So someone threatening someone else as a dispute is not necessarily going to get a sheriff to immediately respond to the back of Deer Creek.
Okay. So switching now, someone asks, what does Boulder Creek Fire Department want to see in terms of fire hydrant upgrades, and does the San Lorenzo Valley Water District have that list?
We don't have a specific list of upgrades. I know that I can tell you anytime that SLV Water is doing a water project, we're closely work together to try and place hydrants as needed when they're doing water line upgrades. Aside from that, unless there's a change in infrastructure, there's really no plan for upgrading the hydrant system or adding hydrants to it.
Okay. Here's a very broad one. Why has fire become more frequent in the last 12 years?
I would say the drought is the big part. I think one theory that's going around is that we probably have the same number of ignitions up here year in, year out. But if you look at how hard it is sometimes for you to get a burn pile going in the backyard, a lot of them will self-extinguish and nobody knows they're there. When fuel conditions get the way they have been over the last decade, those ignitions don't self-extinguish and they get bigger and people notice them and we have to put them out. So it all comes down to the drought, in my opinion.
And switching tack again, what is PG&E's responsibility to keep wires clear, especially non-insulated secondary lines?
They have a responsibility to keep a certain distance clear from all of their lines, and they do go through. I know Davy Tree every year comes through our neighborhood in Ben Lomond. They are required to keep, and I don't know whether it's 20 or 30 feet as a mandatory, and then they've got another distance that is a recommended, which is not a required one. They have to get your permission if they're on your property. But they have been fairly active in the throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains. I don't know about the Deer Creek Valley, but I know that they are every year up on most of these mountain roads in the summer taking out trees and branches.
If I could editorialize or add something, I've spoken to the PG&E people about this a lot, and I was surprised to learn that the regulations about how much they keep clear around their lines depend on whether they're what they call them, distribution lines or transmission lines, and they're mandated by the federal government.
Yeah.
So, okay. How do your response times vary? Do your response times vary in the mountains as opposed to in the valley? And what factors contribute to the response time? And then it goes on and on and on. Oh, I'll say there's another question. Response times? Is there a difference?
Response times, I mean, the closest you are to a station, the closest you are to the downtown station for Boulder Creek, the quicker it's going to be a response. A lot of these, I would say a majority of the large wildfires occur in areas that are far away from a fire station.
Can we get a clarification on that question from
The author?
Hi, Ms. Yockman.
Did we answer your question, or?
Yeah, I was kind of, we love our fire department, there's a lot of volunteers, we're very grateful to have you. But I think it's a reality, especially with Highway 9, and even just trying to get somewhere during rush hour. So I was just kind of curious, what is that impact in our community up here? I actually live in Hilton, but I'm also, I consider all of San Lorenzo all my home. What are the response times and how, because our comfort level is with.
Right, well, response times really vary, as Rich was saying, the distance from the fire station, the access to your property or to wherever the emergency is. And obviously for volunteer agencies, we take a little bit to get out the door because all my folks are coming from home. So they come from home, go to the fire station and respond versus CAL FIRE when they're in season and in the station. You know, they're out the door in a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes tops, probably something like that. So, you know, it does vary. As far as the roads and the traffic and things of that sort, we have red lights on top of our roads and sirens, so.
See those kind of high lows with
So, I'm sorry, say again?
a fast responses and like is there an average or a fast and a slow kind of range that you see?
It is so variable. I mean, responding in Deer Creek, that's easily 30 minutes, if all the roads are open. Response into, say, the Boulder Creek Country Club, well, we could probably be there in only 10 minutes. But then that's going down a paved almost, well, it's a state highway. So it's very dependent upon exactly where the fire, or medical aid. Because the one thing to keep in mind is we probably go to maybe 175 fires a year, but we probably go to easily 6 or 7 times that medical aids and vehicle accidents, non-fire related calls. And if anything, those might be more critical for us to get there quicker, especially the medical aids. And once we get on some of these, I'll keep harping it, substandard roads where you have a fire engine that has to slow way down. Most fire engines aren't four-wheel drive vehicles. They go real slow on those rough roads that aren't up to spec. And that'll really slow us down to get into some of these canyons, if the road's open in the first place.
Can I ask one question based off that answer? You guys speak of defensible space, egress, response times. Has anybody taken into account the mudslides, the single lane roads, Highway 9, Bear Creek, and how fast can we get that? Because if we have a big fire, a lot of us will be trapped.
You know, and that's where, you know, a lot of planning goes into effect. You take last winter storms, when we had a lot of road closures, you know, trees down, mudslides, roads slipping away. There was a lot of things that went on behind the scenes for planning. You know, for Bear Creek Road, we had contingency plans in place with CAL FIRE in case we did lose the road, to where they would be responding down from Burl if they could get there. You know, so there's a lot, all these things are taken into consideration when we do have events like that. And we try to plan for them as best we can. There's going to be times, though, there's not going to be anything we can do because there's going to be areas that are totally blocked off. Hopkins Gulch, perfect example. They were closed off for probably at least a week. I had a great deal of concerns when that road was closed up there for the citizens that were up there in case there was emergencies. So, but we do plan for it as best as we can.
To continue this pivot to evacuation, we have 2 questions on that, if I can find them again. The first questioner asks, relates some anecdotes about trying to get information from CAL FIRE, from the sheriff's office about evacuating, and says, asks, who should they listen to, CAL FIRE or the sheriff's office?
Yes. All the above. So when 911, reverse 911 is initiated, it's not really coming from the sheriff's office or CAL FIRE. It's automatic. It's into the dispatch system. It's coming through county OES, and it's immediately put into the phone system and to the internet. So when you sign up, and at least that's one take home from this, if you're not signed up for reverse 911 on your cell phone, because how often is your cell phone going to be giving you the first notice that something's happening? Basically, you do need to go onto the county OES website and sign up for reverse 911 so that you can get those notices. So as far as initial evacuation, that's where it's coming from. If it's not coming off of that, it's probably going to be when his deputies are coming down, knocking on your door, say, hey, you need to get out. And when one of the first things that goes on some large fires, and that's one thing we found on the Martin fire, and then again on the Lockheed fire, one of the first things that went out was the cell system. So you're going to have to look at some alternatives. But the thing that we're set up for right now is reverse 911 going through several different networks, i.e. cell phones, pagers, old style pagers, some of them are still hooked up to that, and your landlines. And that's where that information is going to come out. Follow-up, pardon? I believe there's somebody in the back that might.
You can go to SCCECC.org. It's right on their homepage. Take you about 5 minutes to sign your phone up for that.
It's run through the county netcom, through our 911 system, and you can register a cell phone, your home phone, you can register email. There's several ways. It's not just one methodology because not everybody is going to be home. If you live out of the area, you might want to include a work phone, that type of a thing. But there's a lot of alternatives to that, and it's run through our netcom dispatch and voice over IP.
You may also find out, and that some people on this fire found out, the first person may know about that fire may not be the family member that's at the fire or at the house. It may be somebody that's at work that communication is getting to. And so just like they talk about emergency plans for earthquakes, same thing with fires. You need to have your family set up their own communication system where they know something happens, how to get information to each other, where to go, where you're going to meet, what you're going to say. You need that up in front.
And to Craig's point earlier about the social resiliency and why that's so important is that if you have neighbors that aren't there regularly or that leave at 4 o'clock in the morning and don't come home till 7 o'clock at night, that somebody's looking after their property or their animals or that kind of a thing for what would happen if they couldn't get home, but they had someone, a family member, a pet, or whatever, that they needed to get out.
Children and shut-ins.
May I add to that? I learned from Mary last night at a CERT meeting that in a big disaster, when all the lines are plugged, it's actually easier to call out of state. So if you have people in another state, that everybody can call that person, because you might not be able to call within the community.
So another question about evacuation, which is one of my nightmares, is in the event of evacuation, could Highway 9, and it says Bear Creek, use both lanes to evacuate?
That's probably going to be up to the highway patrol, especially on the state highway. They were engaged on this fairly quickly also, but that's something that can be looked at.
But never assume. Only do it in the direction of highway patrol. Because if you're coming down the other lane, 2 lanes, and there's a safety vehicle coming up, yeah.
I live quite close to the Martin Fire, and I remember a stream of trucks from Southern California coming up the narrow mountain roads into Bonnie Doon, thinking that the people should have left before this started, because we needed those engines. More editorializing, I apologize. Okay. Circling back to a comment, tying into a comment that Chief McClish made earlier, the questioner says, someone told me that volunteer firefighters have to wait for their supervisor to arrive to start fighting the fire. Is this true? And what if there are traffic problems?
Every fire engine that goes out has somebody that's capable of being a supervisor on it. So when that engine gets there, they're not waiting for anybody. They're working. So that's not true. Not correct.
Please discuss the possible financial support for, it's too bad Supervisor McPherson is left. Because the questioner asks, please discuss the possible financial support for county fire from Proposition 172. Does anybody want to wade into that?
I think that's a Bruce question.
That's a Bruce question.
Yeah.
Is it something the fire safe Santa Cruz can access?
No.
All right.
What I know is that Proposition 172 came in after Proposition 13, and it talks about how property taxes that are for emergency services get divided between police and fire, crudely speaking. And beyond that, that's way out of my league.
Only 0.5% in this county goes to fire, goes to the fire chief. 0.5% of the 17 million every year.
Great question for Bruce.
Yeah. Yes, call and write his office. Okay. Get down there. Where do you stop a fire if you have to protect all this infrastructure? On open space land?
Wherever we can.
So basically, when we get on a fire, and Aldo did this when he was up there, we're gonna draw a box. And the box is where we're gonna attempt to keep the fire within. There's gonna be things that are gonna happen, lack of access, winds, terrain, that could change that box at any given time, but, initially, we're planning on keeping the fire within that box that we draw on the map, so, and we're gonna use, terrain to our advantage too. We're gonna try to hold the fire at a ridge top by putting a dozer line in. But like Rich said, we're gonna hold it where we can, but we are gonna use whatever intelligence that we have to plan for that.
And a well-maintained road really helps.
Keep in mind, Craig was mentioning at the beginning, the first couple hours, it's very confusing. We're trying to get the resources in, and you ramp up to fight fire. And so when we ended up having about 1,000 people working this fire, that didn't happen in the first 2 or 3 hours. They had to come from around the state. Because keep in mind, we still had 6,000 working north of the Golden Gate at the time. And as that's happening, we had to look at our priorities. Our first priority is saving life. So we may not stop that fire. We're probably going to go and either sit on a house if we have people in it and they can't get out, and that fire is going to go right on by, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger. But that's just because we have to work our way through the decision chart. Are we going to save that hillside, or are we going to save some people? We're going to save the people first. Once that's cleared out, and which is harder and harder because some people don't want to leave, we can go ahead and start getting strategic and start picking which ridges we can stop it on. But keep in mind, that's getting harder and harder. Up here you'll see on that far map the 1961 Austrian Gulch Fire, the 1985 Lexington Fire. Those fires went big. They went all the way up to Los Gatos Creek watershed and bumped the county line. Well, right on the county line was right on the ridge top. At that time, they put these big, huge dozer lines, these 5 and 10 blade dozer lines right down the ridge, and that's what they stopped the fire. If you go back there now, those dozer lines are brushed over, and they also have these big, either vineyards or houses right in the middle of them. So now and they got some great views now. But unfortunately, now we have structures in the middle of them, and they're coming to us saying, oh, well, we need to work with you to build a fire break. Well, now the only place to build a fire break is in where the hillside is, where we can't build fire break. So it's very difficult to work these fire lines, especially when you're chasing fire and trying to protect property. So one of our big prevention programs is what we call Ready, Set, Go, and some of you may have seen some of the booklets on that. To help us, you got to leave early. Don't try to wait. Get out of the way early so you don't do what we had with the Martin Fire, where all these engines are coming in. We have people coming out because they waited. That just makes it worse. So get out quick, and hopefully we can go ahead and work our way down the system.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. I've been involved in several evacuations, both water and fire. And in my experience, we go to the house, and when we make contact, we'll tell people they should leave. We don't pull people out of their house under like almost any circumstance. About half the people leave, and about half the people don't. give or take 5%. A lot of people don't want to leave. They have reasons for not leaving, but it creates additional risks, not only for them, but for people who have to come back. And that's why you'll see us tag, doors or houses with, tape or paint to say that we've been to this house, we don't do it again, right? So we're not wasting time on a place we've already been. And oftentimes, depending on the situation, we'll have someone sort of acknowledge in writing that they've been advised to leave, and now you're sort of like, we may not come back. We will if we can. We can't guarantee we're going to come back if things change. And we also get a lot of people coming into emergency zones that they want to see what's going on. We get some thieves occasionally, but mostly we just get people that don't want to leave, but they still want to know what's going on around their place, so they'll actually leave their property and drive around. And it just adds to the confusion, and it takes a lot of discipline to not do that for people, I know. We've all been thinking a lot about school violence recently, and I was talking to the superintendent at Roma Prieta up on the hill here, and one of her biggest concerns is that should they have an incident, is that the first responders won't be able to get to her school because we take a while to get up there, and all the parents with children are going to go right to the site, and police and fire aren't going to be able to get there. Literally, physically can't get through there because it'll be gridlocked. That's her real concern. And so she's going to be talking to, sending out an education to people saying if something like that happens, please don't clog our driveways so that we can get help. This is not new information, right? This is not new messages, but we have to keep repeating them because this is what we see over and over again at these events.
I can't help but interject. Does one of you care to say anything about drones and you people remote sensing their peaking, their sightseeing?
We had an incident on this one. I'm sure a lot of you know there was a drone up when during the daylight, and we had aircraft up, and we couldn't operate. The helicopter pilot sees this little itty bitty drone until it's too late, and so that's our policy, and getting a large, bigger policy. If there's a drone up, we got to put the aircraft on the ground. We're not going to go into the fire. Because those of you got close enough to see what our aircraft were doing, you saw how, jet airplanes diving down into these canyons just above treetop, they don't need that little obstacle in the way. So no drones.
I fear that this might be a little bit redundant, but it's a good way to cap off the discussion about what can be done about illegal camping on forest properties.
Well, in this case, it's all private property, so it really comes down to the property owner controlling their property, and if they need help, they have to reach out to authorities that you have trespasser. And there's some procedure that the sheriff department has to deal with trespassing, and it's involved, but it's basic land law. If this was state park property, it might be something else.
What if it's the property owner who's illegally camping on their property?
That's where you file a complaint with the planning department, code enforcement, and we go through our steps, and it's not a quick, just evict them. We can't go out there and haul them off, but we can definitely get a court, go through the process to get a court order, have them removed.
2 years is a little long.
It is. I know. 2 years ago, we were down to 2 staff. So we're getting ramped up, and our response times are getting better. We're trying to get more and more resolution to a lot of the backlog cases. But I looked in the Deer Creek Valley in the last 5 years, there were 4 complaints that we received over the course of 5 years. And there's a lot of people camping, there's a lot of illegal activity, there's a lot of dope grows, there's a lot of stuff going on there. So if we don't get the complaints, and oftentimes a squeaky wheel, follow-up complaints help move those things up the pile. Sometimes we'll go out and we'll get some resolution, and then a month or 2 later they come back, and we don't know that because we're not doing tours of all the properties. So by all means, file the complaint. It's online. It's an easy process to do.
We have one last question, which is kind of a softball question, but we have got a lot of neighbors here, and I'd like to use the remaining time to have informal discussions, to talk to your neighbors about what you can do, based on what you've learned afterwards. So please feel free to stick around. We've got the room for another hour.
The Fire Safe Council and how it can help with chipping programs. How do people link into the Fire Safe Council?
Yeah. Yes, well, thank you for bringing that up.
Talk about that for a second.
Wait,
So, there was the Fire Safe Council. Fire Safe Council is a group of agencies, homeowners, organizations, and even companies. They get together for a defined area, and they don't have any government authority. They don't have any, they can't go out and write tickets. They can't force somebody to do something. They're a cooperative group that'll go ahead and work together and try to get grants, try to make plans, and work with different agencies and to make things happen, like the chipper program, like a fire plan, community wildfire, the CWPP, community wildfire protection plan, is something that the Fire Safe Councils worked on together when they made it back in 2010. Working with the different departments to do shaded fuel breaks, working on different fire prevention programs or education programs, just helping to put signs up to say, hey, do your defensible space, or hey, fireworks are illegal, to maintain those signs. So there used to be 4 fire safe councils in this county, and they were only for some certain small areas. I think they covered maybe about 30% of the county. It's a lot more county. In fact, what we found out is the areas that were burning the worst were outside the fire safe council. So about 4 years ago, Joe, who's the president, and several groups got together, and we made a kind of an umbrella fire safe council for the county. And in fact, they're the ones who are hosting this meeting today. And what they're trying to do is coordinate between the different groups and try to get these grants to work across the whole county instead of just certain select areas, or at least prioritize where we have the money focused to. So it's just starting out, but it's something that you can work with. Becky comes to the meetings and helps out. I think she's on several of the committees, and move this thing forward so we can get some of these prevention or at least fire safe activities to be successful in the future.
Let me expand on just a little bit on that. Our County Fire Safe Council, we have 2 sorts of solicitations going on right now. We're soliciting shovel-ready projects. What we're seeing is, we haven't advertised it much because we haven't until very recently had the means to do that. We want to take a bunch of those projects, have them ready so that when funding comes, and funding for fire prevention is unfortunately being squeezed by funding for fire suppression nationwide, statewide, at every level, these grant opportunities come usually with a fairly short deadline, so having something that's ready to go, we'd hope to get a bunch of, what would be ideal is if we had several proposed projects that are similar enough that we could lump them together, because funding agencies appreciate economies of scale, and a big project is more likely to get funded than a bunch of small ones, and it's certainly easier to administer. We're also in the process, as Rich mentioned, of updating our community wildfire protection plan. So we're soliciting for sort of theoretical projects that the funding agencies rely on several documents, and I won't go into detail with that, but the primary one that they look at recently has been the community wildfire protection plan. And so if you can point to saying that there's a need in this area, or a need for this kind of work, or a need for this kind of education, and we've included that in the community wildfire protection plan, we're much more likely to get funding for that. And the only way we can, there are relatively few of us. There's a mixture between community volunteers, organizations, agencies, and we need more people to help us broaden our base. We're all in this together, and we've got to do something about it. So there's the end of my sermon. I've got one more question, but I see you raising your hand.
Hi, I'm from the Rebecca Terrace area, and I have some of my neighbors here, and we're all very concerned because this flat road behind us turned into a major disaster. I mean, there's a propane tank sitting there, there are people camping there, they're shooting off their guns at 3 a.m. in the morning. I want the sheriff to walk that property with me to really give it an inspection. It's in litigation right now, nobody should be living on it, and they started a fire in October behind my house, and it was one panic attack. I need some help from one of the officials or two of the officials to walk me through that property, tell me what I can do, what I can't do, tell my neighbors what we can do and what we can't do, and how can we make some positive impact on this impending disaster.
Sure, you approached me actually before the meeting.
I
I
did.
gave you the name of Deputy Adam Roberts, and I suggested you contact him. He's at our new Boulder Creek Service Center here. He can walk up your property with you. We'll have to determine what property it is, whether we can walk it or not, the other property, which is, but sure, we're happy to do that. We come, we get over 100,000 calls a year. We help people all the time, and we'd help you too.
Is the sheriff is the fire department under different regulation than the sheriff?
Yeah.
Can a fireman walk with me on that property?
I didn't know that. I'm just saying, I just can't say I'm going to come and walk the
Okay.
property as a police officer. We can certainly evaluate that. We might just have to see whose property it is.
Can I borrow two really big men to walk with me? I'm not going back about myself.
We have people of all kinds who come and help.
I'm sure there are many people here that have similar concerns. I think it would be more efficient if we could wrap this up and then do that in small groups talking.
One final comment, Joe.
Sure.
As you know, this particular case was an arson case. I just want to give you an update on that. It was recognized as an arson case almost from the very beginning by anybody that was there. So sheriff's detectives and CAL FIRE investigators worked on identifying who the responsible party was. So we did arrest a suspect on this case, of course, and ultimately arrested him also for a shooting that occurred a week or two, within a couple weeks of this fire, as well as a burglary that happened immediately following the fire that he started. He remains in custody. He's looking at a variety of felony charges. He's probably going to remain in jail for a long time until such time as this case resolves one way or the other. Right now, I think he's looking at approximately 30 years in prison, should he be convicted. And that's the status of the case now. He'd highly likely to remain in custody for many years.
So the last question is an important one, not particularly related to the Bear Creek fire, but one of our audience asks, what is the appropriate placement for carbon monoxide detectors?
I leave it to you, I'm the forester.
I would recommend you read whatever the manufacturer's instructions are, to be honest with you. Because there are some combination detectors that go in the ceiling, there's some that they recommend that you plug in down low. Read whatever the manufacturer recommends and follow that.
So perhaps the person who asked this says there's no guidelines on the packaging, but that's something we could probably be best do one-on-one. So I'd like to thank you all for coming out here and supporting us, learning what we can do and what we can't do, what needs to be done. And I invite you to come stick around and discuss this with our panelists and with your neighbors here. Thank you again.